Now, I know that in the United States, it wasn't until the 1930s that we got formal polling institutions. So assessing public opinion is always a tricky thing before you have that. But we do know, obviously, that there was a great deal of unhappiness in Russia about the war, because that certainly seems to have contributed to some of the revolutionary fervor, was a profound unhappiness with the war, the casualties, the unpreparedness, go pick up a weapon from a deceased Russian soldier on your way to the front kind of advice. And that led to explosive results. But it didn't lead to explosive results in other countries, in the Western countries. And I wonder why that is, that this thing was the worst catastrophe anybody had seen, and yet people are still sending their men out to go fight it. What do we know about where public opinion stood in 1918?
Well, we know a good bit. I mean, first we start with America just briefly. I mean, we were, compared to the European powers, we were just in the war for a short time, of course. And that public opinion in the United States was separated from it. There was plenty of propaganda and, as you say, kind of mobilization of public opinion in the United States without as many deaths. I mean, the French lost in the first 4 months alone 1 million casualties, about a third of those killed. So, that's more than the United States would lose in the whole war. So there's not that kind of thing going on. In Russia, as you mentioned, what happens is collapse, and there was so much disorganization and corruption there. The German army seems to have stood firm. The Austrian army pretty firm, with the exception of some units throughout the war. And I think that these twin engines of propaganda and, this feeling that people had of loyalty and patriotism, I think that just kept these fighters going in the field. I mean, many were depressed and discouraged, and people at home, especially in Germany and France, all had relatives and friends killed, but they stood firm. Now, it's also true that in France, there's a lot of research, Tom, on public opinion in France in particular. There's not this hasn't been done as much for Germany and some of the other powers, but in France, it so happens school principals were called on by the government to have teachers report to them the moods that the children displayed in war-related matters. And so there's this massive group of reports from French schools sent to Paris that are still in existence. And, there was some discouragement, but the people at home kept on plugging away. There's not a huge amount of discontent. On the other hand, there was an enormous French mutiny on the Western Front in May 1917, in which about a third of the whole French part of the Western Front went through a mutiny in which soldiers didn't say, we're going to leave these trenches and go home. They didn't say we're going to kill the officers. They didn't say, any of the sort of those kinds of mutinous things. They just said, when we're ordered out there one more time into no man's land to be machine gunned and blown up by artillery, we're not going to do it. We're just going to be in these trenches, and if they come at us, we'll fight, but we are not going to attack and be murdered. So this disrupted the organization of the Western Front, and it's another reason why the Allies thought, well, they were very depressed, and that was even after the Americans had declared war. But there was all the year of 1917, I think leaders on both sides thought it might be up for grabs.